It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This episode is brought to you by Zillow. You've probably spent hours Zillowing on Zillow, scrolling through beach houses, looking up the Zestimate of your boss's house. But Zillow is so much more than searching for homes. Now, Zillowing means finding a top agent who's with you all the way, working with a top-rated loan officer to find a mortgage with Zillow Home Loans, and getting into the home of your dreams, whether it's on a beach or not. Zillow, let's get you home. Download the Zillow app today. Zillow Home Loans, NMLS number 10287.
Welcome back to your source for fantasy hockey news, everybody. Happy Friday. We're going to get you locked, loaded, and ready for the weekend with a little fantasy breakdown, finishing our rewind of the 2022 sixth-round draft to make sure you're ready to dominate next season's. Let's get right to it. Thank you for joining us.
You're Locked On Fantasy Hockey, your daily podcast on fantasy hockey. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Friday, everybody, and thank you so much for tuning in to the Friday edition of the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. On today's episode, we're going to continue our countdown of the 2022 Fantasy Hockey Draft. In the sixth round, things are starting to get real interesting here, Steele, because as much as we're going to go player by player, breaking down where they were drafted, how the season went, and where you need to be targeting them next season, there's also still some news trickling out of the NHL world that Steele and I will have covered. So Monday's episode, make sure you're tuning in for the weekend roundup of all the fantasy news that you need. Thank you for making us your first listen every single day. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Steele, there were some interesting names at the start of the sixth round. We talked about Rasmus Dahlin. We talked about a lot of different players that went appropriately and not so. Colton Parayko and others, which was a really weird one. Today, we see the names up on the board: Nylander, Hellebuyck, Kreider, and others. I'm really excited to continue our countdown over the next week or so. Yeah. But let me throw it right over to you, to a player that's obviously been on our radar quite a bit for a number of reasons, and I'm very intrigued to hear what you have to say about Mr. William Nylander.
Yeah, I'm very intrigued as well, and I have very fluctuating emotions when I watch William Nylander play. Sometimes he just frustrates the hell out of me. You know, like very soft in the corners, not a physical guy. We all know that's not a part of his game, but there's times where it's like, man, just take the extra couple of strides, get the puck. But that's just me. And that's based. This ain't fantasy based right now. Fantasy wise, he's an absolute machine out there. First time 40 goal scorer this past season, 87 points in the full 82 game season. He comes in through the clutch many times in overtime and late in the games. He scores many game winning goals. If you look out throughout his career, 32 game winning goals. He had 5 last year, 7 prior to that, and another 7 prior to that. So he scores a lot of game winning goals. He's very clutch. His ADP, his average draft position, is actually at 64. So it seems pretty accurate to where he was taken in our fantasy draft. But heading into next year, I would feel very comfortable drafting him with the 45th or 46th overall pick, somewhere in that 4th round. You said, so far, there's only been one outlier in this 6th round of ours, and that was Colton Parayko. So far, every other player has been very justifiable, maybe give or take around. But yeah, William Nylander, his ADP is 64, but for next season, I think comfortably you could draft him in the middle to late round of round 4.
I think 87 points and a 40 goal scorer in the middle of the 6th round, actually, was it right for his value headed into last season? For sure, but it ended up being a steal, actually. Yeah. Because he did have a really good offensive season, almost 300 shots on net. Steele. The time on ice went up nicely. And you know what? This is just a really difficult situation in Toronto altogether. There are too many guys that play a similar style. This has been a broken record out of Toronto for a number of years, and they seemingly just keep throwing the same guys back out there. We're not here to talk about the Toronto situation, but I'm here for this William Nylander conversation because he, on the fantasy side of things, like you just said, Steele, he's earned more respect. He's got to move up the draft board, and wherever he plays, because obviously his name is out there as a guy who might not be back in Toronto. 40 goal scorers, 90-point guys are not exactly all over the map for being able to draft.
They are very rare to find. Yeah, 40 goal scorer, guys that can, again, well, this is the first time in his career that he's got 40 goals. Typically a 27, low 30 goal scorer throughout his career. He's only scored 30 plus goals twice so far. But again, you see the progression in his game. You see the speed, you see the stick handling, you see the quick shot. So you know the goal scoring ability is there. Can he get back to 40 next season? If he remains in Toronto, for sure. If he gets traded, because, you know, again, like his name has been circling around on the trade rumor mill over there. You never know, but William Nylander does deserve some more respect heading into next season's fantasy draft. And I think fourth round is good.
Sorry, 100%. And what I really also love, you hear me talk about these little things that I look at in a player situation when I'm getting really hype about them. He's going into a contract year. This is his final year in his deal before he becomes a UFA, $6.9 million. A guy like Willie, who you know has kind of had spurts and he really gets hot. I think with that contract on the line, you might see a little bit more from Willie this year, going to secure the bag for the rest of his contract, right? He's about to enter his prime here. In his prime at 27 years old, this will be the biggest payday of his NHL career still. Keep an eye on Willie because I expect, especially like you said, back in Toronto, 90 points from Willie.
Could happen for sure. A guy who is very, very consistent, though, that is Connor Hellebuyck of the Winnipeg Jets. As of right now, he is still a Jet, but he too also on the rumor mill, not for long. He won't be in Winnipeg for much longer. But to me, I know we've talked about goalies a lot throughout the year and where typically you should draft them. For me, Connor Hellebuyck might actually be the most overlooked and disrespected fantasy goalie in the hockey league right now. Consistently over the last 6 years, he's been a top 5 fantasy goalie and top 2 in the last 2 years. So when I look back at our recap of our draft, there were 11 goalies drafted before him in our league. There should maybe only be two or maybe three. Maybe three if you want to throw Saros or Ottinger in there now. But it should typically only be Vasilevsky or Shesterkin going above Hellebuyck. Even so, maybe Hellebuyck should be going 2 ahead of those guys.
This year,
This year. And even so, as a goalie, he was top 25 in fantasy points amongst all player. He was second amongst all goalies. He was only behind Alexander Gorgiev for the top spot. So he's a beast of a player. If Hellebuyck falls to me in the 6th round, that's just an absolute gift from God. I'm taking that every single day. I would be very surprised. If he's still there by the end of the 3rd round, I would be shocked.
I think this is also one of those scenarios, Steele. You know how sometimes, and we've talked about this, how guys playing really well in the postseason kind of boost their value for next season's draft, and you have to be wary because we're not really sure what that short spurt of a good performance means for the long haul. Connor Hellebuyck got shelled in the last few games of the postseason, and he really didn't look good. So that might, for some GMs, make them a little, that's the last thing they remember about him when it comes to like the newsreel and what you saw. So I think as a GM who really knows better, because I think we can both agree, he just played way too much during the regular season. He had to be the savior for this Winnipeg Jets team, basically the main reason why they were in the postseason. So he saw too much rubber and he was just burnt out. So what I'm trying to say is don't let the postseason fully affect your calls on the players coming up to the draft both ways, whether they played really well and you overreach or they didn't play well and you leave them be. Because I think Hellebuyck, you and I can both agree, especially if he moves teams, he becomes, I have no problem making him the first goalie off the board.
No question. But again, he's been one of the top fantasy goalies over the last 5 years, consistently top 5, if not top 2.
Just a good goalie and a gamer.
Just a consistent, great goaltender in the hockey league right now. And like you said, keep your eyes on if he's to be traded. If he's going to a Stanley Cup contending team, that's a huge difference maker in the crease. His numbers are solid every single year. You check them out. Again, maybe he doesn't get up to 64 games next year. Plays a little less. So because you said the exact same thing for Jake Ottinger. He just played way too many games over the last 2 seasons with the playoffs and the regular season as well. So if we see Hellebuyck traded, Keep an eye on where he goes to.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about this. Typically, we're trying to stay away from drafting goalies within the first 3 rounds, but Hellebuyck might be one of those, exemptions where he slips by in the 3rd round because he's just so good.
920 save percentage, 249 goals against, 4 shutouts, and 37 wins. I believe that paced the NHL. It must have. At the end of the day, too, very quickly, because we're going to get to break right now. We're going to come back and we're going to talk about the rest of our list. Kreider, Johnny Hockey, Josh Norris, Thomas Chabot. But Connor Hellebuyck is also, if you're mentioning that Ottinger point, because I totally agree, Hellebuck's got 5 years, I believe, on Ottinger, maybe at least 4. So the fact that Connor Hellebuyck is 30 and still doing his thing, he's not going anywhere anytime soon. We are not going anywhere anytime soon, except for to talk about our friends at Bird Dogs. Today's episode is brought to you by Bird Dogs. Look, at the end of the day, Bird Dogs are just comfortable while they're bringing that swag. They make you look and feel good. The Bird Dog stretchy khaki shorts are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and the leg, giving you that sculpted look that all of the people out there love. It makes you look confident. It makes you look like you know what you're doing. They fit better than regular shorts, and they are made of they're made of the stiff restricting cotton, and Bird Dogs fix the issue by inventing the cloud knit fabric that looks just like a khaki, but stretches out to get a way slimmer fit without having to sacrifice the movement. Bird Dogs uses the anti-stink sweat wicking fabric that honestly is magic. Like I said, from the course to the clubhouse to the bar, you got to be rocking these Bird Dogs. Steele and I have been loving our free swag. Steele's got multiple orders in for the Bird Dogs. You got to be checking him out all summer long. They're just so comfortable and fashionable. Make sure you head over to birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL for a free Yeti style tumbler with your order. That's birddogs.com/LockedOn for a free Yeti style tumbler. That's it right there. Steele's flashing it. It's sexy. You want to take Bird Dogs. You won't want to take them off. We promise you. So make sure you're heading over to our friends at birddogs.com all summer long.
What's up, everybody? David Harrison here of the Locked On Commanders podcast. When life gets crazy, and honestly, when doesn't it? Walmart helps you keep it all together now with a little extra help from Instacart. If you need your groceries now-ish, but your options for going to Walmart are later-ish or never-ish, you can get everything you need delivered through Instacart right to your door in as fast as an hour. Skip the shop and savor more of your crazy busy life with Walmart and Instacart. Visit instacart.com to get free delivery on your first 3 orders. Offer valid for a limited time. Minimum order $10. Additional terms apply.
And thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. Please hit the subscribe, hit the follow button. Follow us on your favorite podcast platform. Monday through Friday, 7 o'clock in the morning is when you can find all of our episodes. And thank you so much for tuning in for today's episode with Flip and I. We are going to talk about Josh Norris and Chris Kreider coming up towards the end of the episode. We've got Johnny Gaudreau. I know it says Philip Forsberg on the graphic here, but it's actually Thomas Chabot. That's my bad. That's my bad. Okay. I left that one out there for a little bit, but it will be Thomas Chabot at the end of the episode. But let's kick things off with the New York Rangers forward and veteran Chris Kreider, who, again, 2 years ago, dropped a 50 bomb for goals in the league, and then follows that 52-piece goal in the 2021-22 season. Career high 77 points that year as well.
Yep.
Kind of regressed a little bit. I think we expected this, but Chris Kreider 20 plus less points than the year prior.
Yeah, and this is tricky because I don't want to take away from a guy, Steele, that in my opinion is, one of the best, just solid all around New York Rangers to ever do it. Yeah. And he has been a solid, you can bank on him for that 45-point plateau. He's been a little over, he's been a little under most of his career. His peripherals are usually actually pretty good when it comes to hits. He comes with a little bit of PIMS. He does bring more than just the goal scoring, but I think, like we said last year, it was easy to predict a regression. There's no way this guy was going back to the 52-point plateau. But look, he's going to be 33 years old next year. He's played a lot of games in his career because he's been, a very longevity kind of player. I'm just wary, Steele. That's what I'm trying to spit out here.
Yeah.
I think you drafted him a little bit early, in my opinion. 6th round last year, I would have waited a little bit because I was expecting the regression. Is it egregious? No. I would have gone 8th, 9th round for Kreider. This year, I'm going 10th, 11th. Is he draftable?
Yeah.
Yes, because he's going to get a lot of looks in the New York Rangers top 6. So he's still definitely a draftable player now near the back half of the draft, in my opinion.
Couldn't agree more with you. That's spot on with everything I have here in my notes. I think everyone just fell in love with the 52 piece again with a 50-goal season.
Hey.
But you look at the actual stats, you look deep into the numbers. 26 of those goals were on the power play. He scored 50% of them on the power play. And his second best career high in the power play was 11. We just knew that wasn't going to happen again. I think, again, people just fell in love with that. And it proves it with his ADP. His average draft position last season was 34.1. That's in the middle of the 3rd round. That's way too early, way too high for Chris Kreider. We saw this coming. We didn't know how much of a regression it would be. The peripheral stats are good. Over 200 shots, 24 blocks, 120 hits. But they too also slightly decreased. His goals dropped, his assists dropped. Every stat pretty much dropped off a little bit. Shots dropped off. Everything dropped off for Chris Kreider. Yep. So the regression was there. I think in our league, the 3rd round is way too high. The 6th round is still, for me, a little too early. So I agree with you. I think he drops to the 10th, maybe even the 11th round.
And I think that's fair. And he's still bringing value. It's just this is what you have to assess. And, I'm sure John Chick, I'm sure some Rangers fans might disagree. But at the end of it all, that's where you have to separate that bias. And I'm a victim of it all the time, Steele. Look at some of my picks. We're going to get to some of them on the later episodes. And like I mentioned on yesterday's episode, you have to separate your feelings for the player. Yeah. And you have to remember there's the on-ice success and what that player brings to what the team will do overall and what he will do and bring to your fantasy team. And the GMs that know that difference are usually the ones at the top of the table taking your money.
Yeah, that's usually how it goes with drafting these type of players. And a way that it went for this player and someone that I actually drafted in a different fantasy league, in my Yahoo fantasy league, was Josh Norris of the Ottawa Senators. I drafted him. I can't remember what round it was in that league, but in our fantasy hockey league, he was drafted 63rd overall. And obviously it was a very short-lived season for Josh Norris, suffered a shoulder injury, rehab, decided not to go, the surgery route right away, tried to rehab it for a couple months, tried to make a comeback in late January, and unfortunately re-injured his shoulder. So then he had to undergo some surgery on that. This one's very difficult for me. Just looking at his ADP last year, he was a 93.9 ADP. So that's the middle of the 8th round. And I think his true value does lie maybe around the late stages of that 8th round or, in the 9th round. I think the 6th is just way too high, especially coming off an injury. I am very excited to see Josh Norris back in a Senators uniform, playing with that top 6. I think it would have been a lot different. It would have been a lot different of a playoff series or a playoff experience. Ottawa was only 6 points back of a playoff spot. So if Norris was there the entire season, you never know if Ottawa is that one team to sneak in there. Could have been an entirely different story this postseason. But, Josh Norris coming back from injury, where do you think he lands?
Yeah, in terms of his draft position last year, I was, how high I am on Josh Norris. Was it a little bit premature? Perhaps by a round or two. I don't think, again, it was like totally awful because, yes, he was banged up in the year previous. But when he was, I think it was his finger or hand, right? It was a bit of a rough one.
Yeah.
Then this year it was the shoulder a couple of times. So in terms of where he was drafted last year in our league, 6th round, 7th round, that area, I was kind of okay with it because how much I like this player. And 93 points in 133 NHL games. We got to be paying attention to what's going on with this guy. He was the 4th in Calder voting 3 years ago. The health is an issue, Steele. And this is the question. I'm trying to cop out a little bit by preambling it here so I can keep thinking about what you do with Josh Norris because those were serious. That's a serious shoulder injury. But the fact that he's also surrounded by so much talent, if he was going back to a situation where he's off the injury, the confidence is down, his game, comfort is down, I might be more wary. I'm actually willing to take a risk on Josh Norris right around where you were mentioning. I'm willing to take a risk because if he is healthy, he's going to be beast. He's that good. I'm going to say 8th round. I'm definitely going to start taking a look at Josh Norris.
I think right around there, 8th, 9th round is when you should be. I know you're very high on Drake Batherson as well, a good teammate and good buddy of his. And
I'm taking him higher for sure.
Any type of Ottawa Senators in the top 6, again, Claude Giroux, Brady Tkachuk's pretty much a borderline first round pick. Yeah, borderline first rounder. He's right there. His brother is obviously a first rounder after the season he just had, but Brady Tkachuk, Claude Giroux, Drake Batherson, Josh Norris, Thomas Chabot, who we're going to be talking about very, very shortly. These are all guys who, to me, very easy. Maybe we'll get to Thomas Chabot, but those are the top 6 forward guys are guys that you are draftable in the top 8 rounds of the Fantasy Hockey League. We are going to get to Thomas Chabot, another Ottawa Senator player drafted in this 6th round. Kick things off with Johnny Gaudreau, drafted 62nd overall in our Fantasy Hockey League. But this episode is brought to you by one of our favorite sponsors on the show, and that's Game Time. I literally use this app every single time I'm looking for sporting event tickets. Buying tickets to your favorite sporting event doesn't need to be stressful. That's why I use this Game Time app. This weekend, for example, I'm going to another BC Lions game. Saw the season opener. They absolutely smoked the Edmonton Elks 22-0, shut them out. It was a great experience, and so was Game Time. So I just hopped on the Game Time app and easily purchased my tickets with no hassle. It's the fastest and easiest way to purchase your tickets for any event, though. Not just sports, looking for music, comedy, and theater shows, anything near you. Tickets will be emailed right to your phone. And even if you're looking for those spontaneous adventures, Game Time has flash deals on last-minute tickets right up to the start time. They're easy to find and even let you preview the seat images before you purchase. It's the fastest-growing ticketing app in the country for a reason, and the tickets are sent directly to your phone so you won't have to dig through your email. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. So download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
This episode is brought to you by Zillow. You've probably spent hours Zillowing on Zillow, scrolling through beach houses, looking up the Zestimate of your boss's house. But Zillow is so much more than searching for homes. Now, Zillowing means finding a top agent, someone who can answer all your home buying questions, even the ones you're embarrassed to ask. They'll take you on tours, offer expert local advice, and help you get into the home of your dreams, whether it's on a beach or not. Zillow, let's get you home. Download the Zillow app today.
And thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. Don't forget, we are free and available on your favorite podcast platform. We appreciate all the love and support you show us.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm going to need some support after talking about this pick that I made in the 6th round. This was my draft pick in the 6th round. Johnny Gaudreau, 62nd overall flip. And now that I looked at his ADP, I don't feel so bad anymore about drafting him in the 6th because his ADP was 23.5. He was being taken in the later stages of the 2nd, maybe early third round, which after the season he had, going choosing Columbus to be the team that he wants to play for, I'm not sure why people were drafting him that high.
Well, maybe because he put up 115 points the year before, and this goes right in the same vein of what we were just talking about.
Yep. Be
wary of what the season before's performance and the postseason's performance does to inflate or deflate players' values. This is Exhibit A right here, Johnny Gaudreau. Maybe that was its deal, but I'm going to hit you with this take. Because last year, I understand that you're like, I would be cheese too. Took him a little bit too early. Pretty disappointing season. Mind you, 74 points is nothing to fully shake a stick at. Minus 33 on the team that was that bad and that injured. Honestly, I think that could be minus 103, considering he did almost log 20 minutes of ice time per night. And you're not drafting Johnny Gaudreau for any peripheral value. We know this. We're not here to talk about that. But I'm going to talk about this. Some of these young pieces in Columbus, Marchenko, Johnson, Roslovich, Sillinger, even underrated Liam Foudy. They have some pieces coming up. If this team stays healthy, Boone Jenner being main, Patrick Laine, of course. I think if that line stays together, Steele, I don't know about the Columbus Blue Jackets overall, but I think that line can be very effective.
I think there are some, there are a few good pieces on the team. And again, you mentioned it right there that they were one of the top 3 teams in the NHL that just struggled with games lost to injuries throughout the entire year. So like you said, he still had a good season with everything, all things considered, with the amount of games that his teammates missed and going to a new team, going from Calgary to Columbus. Still a good season. 21 goals, 74
Fantasy-wise,
Fantasy-wise, still
sure.
a good season. 21 goals, 74 points.
I think he bounces back. That's what I'm feeling.
I don't know about that. See, I remember drafting him, and I remember saying out loud that I'm taking a chance on this player, and I do believe I reached on him just a little bit. I think I took him too early in our draft, and we knew that his fantasy value was going to drop going from Calgary to Columbus. I don't know if he bounces back in that type of way. I can see him either remaining the same. I could definitely see him putting up the same stats, but I'm just looking at a fantasy standpoint. 2 years ago, with Calgary, he was the 16th best fantasy hockey player that season. Last year, he was 124th. And again, I understand Patrick Laine was injured, Boone Jenner was injured, Werenski was injured. The team was really bad. But to me, if you're drafting him any higher than round 8, I'm good luck, goodbye, because I just don't think that's a good pick.
9 or 10 or later, and you can get Gaudreau, though, and things go right. And, those are ifs, those are caveats. I think this is one of those ones that I know other GMs are going to sleep on. That's where I'm looking at this. I think he's going to drop, and he should, because what you're saying is also accurate. I just think if he drops too far, we're going to be on this kind of show next year going, we slept on Gaudreau, because let's not forget he is an elite offensive talent. Is his game a little one-sided? Does he need a little help from his line mates? For sure. But look at what he can do when there's a line mate on his wing that stays healthy in Calgary. Like Matthew Tkachuk, there's not many like him. But Patrick Laine brings a wrinkle. Boone Jenner does too. And I think, this is one of those situations, Steele, where I want to bet you on the point total. I'm going to say over 80.5 points. He finishes with 81, 82, 83. We'll talk about some side bets as we get closer to the year. But let's get into Mr. Thomas Chabot. I'll throw it over to you.
Thomas Chabot, the 61st overall pick in our fantasy hockey draft, the first overall pick in this 6th round, finished with 11 goals, 41 points in 68 games. Another guy who struggles with injuries throughout his career so far. ADP, his average draft position is 112, which is round 10. I think, again, looking at him both from a hockey standpoint and a fantasy hockey standpoint, the 61st overall is just way too high not way too high, but it's too high. I think
it's a little early.
It's a little early. This might be a player to draft a little bit earlier than 112, what his ADP is at right now. I have him sitting at 99th or the 100th pick in the draft. I think that's the most appropriate spot for Thomas Chabot, because I still think he's working on trying to be that number 1 defenseman, and he can be. There's the potential is there. We've seen it. But again, let me just pull up the stats real quick.
I got it right here.
Yeah, I think over his career, he's struggled with injuries so far. I think
he hasn't played a full season.
The Ottawa Senators are now at a point where if he remains healthy, he's got the talent up front in the top 6 group. The power play looks very, very good, both the first and the second power play unit. Yeah. I could see him getting up to 55 points, maybe 60 next year if he plays an almost full 82-game season because of the guys that he's surrounded by. Again, I just think he's missing one thing to get him to that next level.
The injury factor is number 1. I think what really hurt him last year in terms of, 41 points, that's still valuable. 123 blocks. His game on that end of the ice is rounding out. And I think that's where it hurt his offensive value, Steele, because we know he can bring it in the offensive end. He had to be too responsible for this Ottawa team. Both goalies get hurt. The top 6 is in flux. The bottom 6 was in flux. They had a number of injuries to key pieces. I believe Artem Zub was out for a little while. Jake Sanderson is another name to watch. I really like Jake Sanderson's game. But Chabot, I think, was a victim of, aside from being banged up, I think he had to shoulder too much responsibility. And there was just too many things working against the Ottawa Senators this year, on the ice, off the ice, or what have you. It just wasn't their year. We know the talent is there, and the talent is there with Thomas Chabot. I'm not ready to give up on this guy even close. This is just, again, one of those cases where I think some guys are going to sleep on Thomas Chabot. I'm with you on where you got to take him, but I think 60 points is well within this guy's reach. And if he puts up 55 and 70 in 2019, I think we're not far off the mark either.
Yeah, I don't think we're far off the mark. I think there's definitely, I think you're right though. Again, it's the same with Josh Norris. I'm just, with these two Ottawa Senator guys, I'm finding it really hard where to place them, because I know where I would take Brady Tkachuk. I know where I would take Drake Batherson or Claude Giroux, because Claude Giroux is actually a keeper of mine in my Yahoo fantasy league.
Oh,
but with both
weird
Josh
that you mentioned
Norris,
Claude Giroux, Steele, because we have a little Claude Giroux giveaway coming up. We'll allude to that in a second.
We do have a Claude Giroux giveaway coming up this offseason, so make sure you're staying tuned for everything Flip will mention soon. But yeah, Thomas Chabot and Josh Norris are just two Senator players that I'm having a little difficulty trying to place. I feel confident with placing Thomas Chabot at the 99th or 100th overall pick in the fantasy draft. But with Josh Norris coming off this injury, it's a little bit more difficult.
Most definitely. And also, defensemen are a little bit harder to come by. They're tricky. Very tricky. So I very much love Thomas Chabot. I think there's still a ton of value here. Let's be careful about where you take him. Claude Giroux, signed puck giveaway for our next batch of subscribers. We're pushing all the way to 1,000. We're going to have a draw for a certified Claude Giroux signed puck. If you're a Claude Giroux fan, you're a Philly fan, you're an Ottawa Senators fan, make sure you subscribe. Make sure you follow on Twitter. And we will be having a draw for a Claude Giroux signed puck, and we'll be shipping it out ahead of the season. So make sure, if you're listening, subscribe, drop us a 5-star review, and make sure you're following on Twitter.
When do you think, Flip? August, late August, maybe early September when the preseason starts?
I'm thinking
that's a good time for a little gift.
I'm thinking September 1. We'll run it from now to September 1, right up until where training camps are starting to get heavy.
Love it.
When that kicks off, we'll give away a puck. And I think we're going to start working on some more giveaways, Steele, some more special guests. We got off-season content up the wazoo. So make sure you're tuned and tapped into the show all summer long.
Yeah, and we're going to have to see how many people want to join this fantasy hockey league of ours as well. Just done our first year, heading into our second. We might have 2 or 3 fantasy leagues going on, depending on how many people want to be a part of it. We'll see how many we can squeeze into one league. But we're very, very excited about this offseason. The NHL draft coming up very shortly in a few weeks from now in Nashville. So make sure you're staying tuned for that. And thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. Make sure you're tuning in Monday through Friday, 7 o'clock in the morning Eastern time is when you can find our episodes. And thank you all so much for all the support and for tuning in for today's episode with Flip and I. Have a great day. Good luck with all your summer bets out there. And we shall see you back here again tomorrow.
Peace.
There's no off-season for the true NHL fan, and there are no off days for Locked On NHL. This off-season, Locked On NHL has you taken care of. In just 30 minutes every day, Locked On NHL will give you the latest on all the fireworks of the NHL off-season. Locked On NHL, free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.